Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the biggest, the baddest, the most could warm up 80 degrees and still be below freezing storytelling program in all of Alaska. It's time for Dark Winter Nights, True Stories from Alaska. And to get our show started, please welcome to the stage the Red Hackle Pipe Band. And now, please welcome your host, Brittany Carnes.
Hello. Welcome to Dark Winter Nights. Another sold-out show. This is bananas, you guys. We are so lucky to live in this state, in this town, and have the best audience there is. So at our last show, we didn't really have an inkling that it was gonna sell out until it suddenly happened. And so Robin, who runs our box office, had to tell some people, like, I'm so sorry, we've sold out. And they said, we'll wait. And she was like, wait for what? And they said, we'll wait. And sure enough, she ran around and figured out how to squeeze everyone in. But you guys are insane. We love you so much. All right, how many have been to a show before? And how many are new? All right. This show is a love letter to Alaska and the interior. Life here isn't always easy, but it is great. And we're so lucky to live with such amazing people. And we just love having this opportunity to celebrate Alaska and celebrate the golden hearts of the interior. And on behalf of myself and the Dark Winter Nights crew, we just want to say how much we love making this show and getting to spend this time with all of you. So thank you again. Speaking of, it looks like most of you already have, but if there's any seats left, show your community some love by scooting in, just in case there's anyone who's still trickling in. But I don't see a single one. So, can you believe we are now in our 10th year of this show? So this show, actually the first one was April, technically, so April 2014. But we are really excited. By my count, we've had 15 shows in 10 years, and that includes some COVID years and some other years, and 101 stories on our stage, not counting tonight. So that's pretty awesome. So to celebrate that, we have a 10th anniversary show coming up in May. So it's May 3rd. It was as close as we could get to the original date. It's going to feature some of the stories we've already had on our show, but we're really excited about it. And it is a much smaller auditorium. And we originally started there. That's why we wanted to have our anniversary show at Pioneer Park. But I do notice we sold out Pioneer Park. We moved here. We're selling this out. Does that mean Carlson Center next? Also, we do have our next herring show scheduled, so it's going to be November 23rd, so definitely keep that one on your calendar too. In between, we definitely have the podcast. A new episode just went up recently, and we have several more in the works. And we actually have full video of all of the shows we've ever done on our YouTube library. So I actually hadn't seen some of the early shows, and I've been checking those out while I do my dishes. So just a long shot. Has anyone been to every show? Rob Prince. All right, after tonight's show, a couple of our stories tonight have some photos that go with them, and we're gonna put those on our Facebook and our Instagram, so if you wanna check those out and you don't already follow our social media, give those a peek. I also wanted to give out a huge shout out to In My Element, who has dressed me this evening. Did they do a good job? Yeah. So I love In My Element. The ladies there take such amazing care of you. They bring you things you might never have thought to try on yourself, and they give you honest opinions on how you look in things, which is very valuable. I also wanted to thank some of our other sponsors, so KOAC and Lori Neufeld, who always put our things in prime time. The Fairbanks Distillery has been a longtime supporter of Dark Winter Nights. I wanted to say thank you also to the North Star Community Foundation. We're grateful to be a member project under its 501c3 status, which allows us and its other member projects to function as a nonprofit. And finally, I wanted to thank another one of our sponsors, the High Life Connoisseurs, who video our shows. They just do such a great job. That's how we have all of our video for KOAC and for the YouTube. And totally unexpectedly to all of us in the show, 1 hour ago on the stage, Roscoe proposed to Lorraine, and they're now engaged, and they're in the back videoing, so. And I'm not really sure how the microphone setup exactly works, but in the dressing room, I heard all of it, and I was like trying not to cry while I put on my makeup, so. All right, have we all been playing Alaskan Bingo this winter? Because I think we not only filled out a row, we filled the entire sheet. First, I'm pretty sure that free space in the middle, that's gotta be the free parking at Ivory Jacks, right? But let's count them off. So we've had warmer than normal temperatures. Then we also had a proper interior Alaska cold snap with like 50 below or colder, depending where you are in town. We've had some of those, I heard it. We've had some of those pretty cool atmospheric things like the light pillars, which I love for some reason. And then there was a couple days with, they call it Fata Morgana, where there's the temperature inversion and somehow it makes the mountains look like pillars or towers. That was pretty cool. The ice fog, I think it's the thickest I've seen in my life, and I'm from here. Thicker than that time we accidentally broke the fog machine on the Dark Winter Nights show and like overfogged. I'm glad you guys know which time I mean. And then I think, some noticeable earthquakes. But I think the weirdest one to me that made me wonder if it was the apocalypse was when it was 35 below and snowing, right? Cold means clear. How was there any moisture in the environment to fall on us? I don't know. Did any of us do the UAF 45 below, 40 below club? Me too. I've always kind of meant to, and we haven't had that cold for a little bit. And then, how many of us heard the story last show about the 45 below club? Did you clutch your keys so tightly when you went to get that picture? I did. A friend recently told me that, I think his story is actually from a few years ago, but he went to do the 40 below picture and he sent it to all his family and friends really far away and then realized he blocked the minus. So I was very specific about that. I'm glad he told me that story first. That being said, did anyone go and get the 45 above picture a week later? I regret that I didn't do that because that would be a great side-by-side. Is that the fact that it can warm up 100 degrees in a week one of the most Alaskan things? I'm pretty sure that it is. I think even more crazy than the fact that a bunch of us here are willing to go stand in our swimsuits in 40 below, 50 below, some people, right, is the fact that so many of us want to do it, it created a traffic jam. And there were cars down University past Belane Lake. What kind of civilization does a voluntary traffic jam to suffer? Ours does. I think that's one of the most Alaskan things. During this cold snap, I went to a sauna at a friend's, and it was a clothing optional sauna, but it's all dark, whatever. But then I walked through the 45 below, and I went inside to put on clothing. That's a pretty Alaska thing. Also on one of those weekends, I took a trip down to Talkeetna, to go somewhere tropical and warm and 8 above. And we went to the ski trails, and there was a dog sled just sitting there with no one around. And as we're getting ready, I watched a lady ski jor up, unhook her dogs from her belt, hook them to the dog sled, take off her skis, buckle those into the dog sled, and mush away. Which means she mushed there to ski jor and then mushed home. That might be one of the most Alaskan things I have ever seen. Well, the good news is we've made it through the cold, we're coming out of the dark, we're headed into the warm season. And actually, it's just about to be one of my favorite times of year, snoodle season. All right. For anyone who doesn't know what a snoodle is, this is a thing that came up last year, and I have no idea how it started. This is like the most Fairbanks-specific thing ever. You know how on the traffic lights, the snow accumulates and freezes all winter, and then the March sun beams down and it starts it stays connected and it starts drooping? People started taking time-stamped photos of the snoodles around town and putting them on Facebook like a Nenana Ice Classic situation, like it's still there at 5 p.m. Except I also think we got sad when they finally went. Snoodle is officially on Urban Dictionary. There are a lot of definitions there, and they are not all savory. So a little caution, but there's officially an entry. It says, in Fairbanks, Alaska in 2023, it was agreed upon that snoodle means snow noodle, as in hanging down from streetlights resembling a noodle. I did click through. Most of those definitions on there have under 100 likes. So if every single person in this auditorium goes and upvotes the Fairbanks one, it will be the official snoodle definition. So that's my homework to all of you, is go cautiously upvote one specific snoodle definition. All right. I think all of this has had us wondering, what is the most Alaskan thing you've ever seen? And we're gonna count things you've seen, or if you heard yourself saying something and you were like, that is the most Alaskan thing. Or if you've heard someone say something. So we have a couple things that are part of our show tonight. So one is a strip in your programs asking you, what's the most Alaskan thing you've seen or heard? And we're gonna read some of those out on the stage tonight. The other thing in your program is tonight we have, you may have noticed, an audience wild card spot. So we have one person tonight who's gonna tell a story, but they don't even know it yet, and it could be you. I will actually explain the rules this time. It has to have happened in Alaska. It has to be true. It has to have happened to you. You can only turn in your own name. You can't turn in a neighbor. I did sign up a roommate for a very long karaoke song once, and she did eventually forgive me, but it's not the best tactic. And we're ideally looking for about 10 minutes or under. So you'll see our volunteers walking around with baskets. You can also turn those into intermission. That audience storyteller is gonna be first up right after intermission, so factor that in just a little bit. If you have a great story, but you don't feel like telling it tonight, still mark it on that form, because we are absolutely gonna call and email you after. And if you are interested in, you have a great story, or someone you know does, but you're not like a stand in front of 1,300 people kind of person, we have the podcast, and we would still love to talk to you and collect that. So please let us know. We are always on the search for more stories, because this show doesn't exist without them. All right, we have a great show tonight. It starts with me stopping talking and all of you silencing your phones. Our first storyteller is coming to tell us a story. We know Alaska has a lot of things that people are properly afraid of, right? Bears, wolves, moose. Some of the cold things like hypothermia or falling in a crevasse or an avalanche. And then maybe most terrifying of all is tourists driving on snow and ice. She's not telling a story about any of those. Please help us welcome to the stage Randi Carnahan, telling a story about an unlikely foe.
Let the bass kick.
We good? Hi, everybody. I just love going first. So, living in Alaska, in Fairbanks in particular, most of my life, I've always enjoyed all of the outdoor activities that we Alaskans enjoy, year-round. But as I got to be a woman of a certain age, and I don't have to divulge that because it's individual for everyone, the cold weather started tapping me on the shoulder a little bit and saying, hey, why don't you go inside and knit? And gradually, I started backing off of my wintertime things, but I didn't want other people to know. So it was like, oh, snow machining this weekend? Oh, God, I'd love to, but I have plans to knit a sweater. My girlfriends would talk about the cross-country skiing things, and I would join in the conversations, but somehow my purchase of skis never materialized. So slowly over time, I realized I was gonna be a summertime outdoor girl. And that's been okay. I have a kayak that I absolutely love and use, and I have a bike. And between those two things, I can still call myself an Alaska outdoor person. So I was living on the west side of Fairbanks. This was a few years back. And the day that my story takes place was the kind of day in the summer that you wake up and you reach for the shorts and put the shorts on because you know it's gonna be a hot, beautiful day. It was that day. It was like the perfect day. And I decided I was gonna go for a bike ride. So on the west side of town, there's a bike path that goes along the highway from University West, and it goes under the overpass, comes up the other side, and so you can get to Pegger Road and then over to Farmers Loop to the bike path there without having to cross much direct traffic. And I love that bike path because it went down along the river. So on this particular day, I'm ready to go, and I've got my tennis shoes on, I've got my shorts on, my tank top, I've got my earbuds in, and I decided to take this route in reverse. So I had actually gone and done some Farmers Loop, and I'm jamming out to my music, really best day ever. And I'm coming back, and I go to take that bike path to go under the overpass, and I always like to stop there at the river and congratulate myself for a minute for my outdoorsiness, right? So, doesn't matter what kind of shape I'm in, I put shorts on and I went outside and I went for a bike ride. So I'm coming in and I get to the river part, I'm getting close to that, and I sort of stop there for a minute by the river, and I'm just so happy with myself. And I get back on my bike and start coming around the curve. And then it's a straight shot that I can see for quite a ways to where I'm gonna go into my neighborhood. And I see a runner coming, and then quite a ways behind him, his dog, who seems to be struggling a little bit. I don't think much of it, but I do know the rules of the bike path. So I wanna make sure I'm over to the right so that this runner can pass me on the left, just like road traffic, I learned. So he gets closer, and he whizzes past me, and we do the sup. And he goes on by, and I think to myself, that guy didn't even turn around to see how his dog was keeping up, because the dog is struggling, and I'm thinking maybe he's an older dog. I'm not too concerned. But he's on my side of the bike path. So I've stayed on the right side. This dog is on the right side. And I thought, well, they don't really know the rules of the bike path. So I'm gonna pull over to the middle, and that way he has an option to go on either side. And when I pulled to the middle, so did he. Again, he doesn't know the rules. So I pull all the way over to the left, thinking maybe that's the way, maybe he wants to go that way, and he pulls over to the left. He soon gets close enough for me to realize he's not a weird-looking dog, he's a beaver. Now I'm trying to think, my brain is doing some interesting things. I'm trying to reconcile myself to the fact it's a beaver. It's never seen that. And I'm trying to think of everything I may possibly know about beavers in the wild, because when you live here in Alaska, you know a lot of things about a lot of animals. You know to not torment the moose. You know a lot of things. But all I could come up with was a picture of a cute little beaver, right, chewing on a log, and that's not helpful. So I pulled all the way back over to the right, and so did he. I pulled to the middle, he immediately did the same thing, and now I realize, as he's getting closer, I start thinking this other series of thoughts. Thought number one, beavers are a lot bigger in person than you think they are. which is why I thought he was a dog from all the way back there. Thought number 2, this beaver is actually aggressively coming for me. And again, I can't think of anything in my knowledge of beavers that will substantiate this, but it looks like that's what's happening. Thought number 3 is my shorts and my bare ankle bones, and recalling that beavers have a couple of the big teeth. I then thought about the gorgeous beaver mucklucks in my closet at home. Did he know what was the beef here? I'm not really sure. So it became evident to me, in spite of trying every part of the bike path, he wanted to be right in front of me and was coming at me, and at some point there was a realization we were going to collide. And so my number 1 immediate goal, thinking quickly on my feet, is don't fall off your bike, Randy. Whatever you do not fall off the bike. And my second immediate preventative solution was to lift my legs all the way off the pedals like this and start screaming at the top of my lungs, like an absolute girl, right? Sure enough, we did collide. And I felt the front tire of my bike. Hey, it wasn't funny at the time. We'll get to that. The front tire of my bike went over his tail, and I can still remember what that felt like. And then everything slowed down like in the Matrix at that point. When the tire went over the tail, keep in mind, my legs are still up, but I'm looking down to see where those teeth are. I want to make sure my legs are up high enough, although truthfully, they couldn't have gone much higher. Everything slowed down, and he reared up on his hind legs. He couldn't jump couldn't do it. I'm thankful to my bike tire for that one thing. But he reared up, and as I was passing him, screaming, and I'm looking at him, and we locked eyes. I wasn't on anything. That really was a thing. And we locked eyes. We looked right into each other's eyes, like in slow motion as this was happening. And I'm sure my eyes were trying to say something like, "Oh my God, I am so sorry about your tail. I'm sorry." And his eyes were looking at me saying, "Oh, you're going down, MFer." I didn't fall off the bike, but I was terrified. I was absolutely terrified. And so when I felt like I was completely off the tail, first tire and then second tire, got him twice, my feet found the pedals again, and I, of course, just started like, "Oh my God, but stop screaming. There's no one to help you." And I'm pedaling, and I turned around, and he is running after me. Like, do you really think you can outrun me on this bike? But it made it more terrible. I get it that you're mad that I ran over your tail, but I didn't start this thing particularly. So I pedaled all the way, and I'm just about to the part where I'm going into the neighborhood, which should be safety, but I don't know. And another runner is coming, and of course I, trying to be helpful, screamed at the top of my lungs, "Beaver attack!" He did not give me the sup. He looked at me like there was a crazy lady coming off the bike path. I got home and I locked the door, threw myself on the couch, and my heart was just pounding out of my chest. It was something so unexpected in the middle of a beautiful day. And about a year later, I met a wildlife biologist just through casual conversation and relayed this story, and what he told me was chances are very good that beaver was rabid. Like, they do not come after people. So I felt justified in running over his tail. That'll teach you. But the long and short of it is, I tried to tell this story a couple of times, just, when you're in settings with friends and somebody says, I got kicked by a moose, and then I would say, hey, well, this one time I was attacked by a beaver, trying to tell it as a scary story. And of course, everyone would laugh before I even told the story. So I guess just the title of the story was funny enough, they didn't even need to hear it. So I've always been curious whether this was a scary story or a funny story or a little bit of both, and I think you've answered my question tonight. Thank you.
Randi Carnahan. Just going to read some of these memories people turned in. So, what is one of the most Alaskan things you've seen or heard? Beaver attack. Beaver attack. Why is there no traffic in town today? Oh, it's Arctic Man weekend. On my first trip to Valdez, I saw an old car parked at the docks. It had a plastic deli salad bowl epoxied on it instead of a front headlamp. I thought, I'm not in Utah anymore. The freight cost twice as much as the item. And then on the way to Delta, we were stopped on the Richardson Highway for construction, so I turned the engine off to wait. The tourist friend traveling with me said, don't give up, let's just take another road. Oh, that's pretty funny. All right, has anyone here had a paranormal encounter? Do we have any ghost believers? All right, next up we have not one, but actually two stories. It's two siblings, and their stories go hand in hand. You can tell there's no love lost between the two of them. And it all started when one of them noticed some unusual activity in his garage, or as he corrected me, in his shop. So please welcome with me Cyndie and Art Warbelow.
Hello. Nest security camera infrared lights have seen some strange sights. But the strangest mine ever did see was that dark winter night I played host to Casper, the ghost. But my sister was the one with the key. The story that I'm going to describe to you tonight took place in September and October 2017 at my house at the east end of Chena Ridge. And to the best of my knowledge and memory, everything I'm going to tell you tonight is true, notwithstanding the fact that I've already used the word ghost. But I only use that word as a placeholder for something that even now, 7 years later, I cannot explain some of the events that I witnessed that fall and some of the images that I saw recorded on my Nest security camera. So I invite you to draw your own conclusions about what was happening actually in my garage that fall as I describe these events and images. Now, the previous year, I'd contracted with Tim Sonnenberg of TS Construction to build a 2-story, 28 by 40-foot garage in my front yard. It was built on sloping ground such that the upstairs doors that faced my living room windows opened on a deck at ground level. And there was an exterior set of stairs that went from that deck down to the entry door on the left side of the building at the lower level, which is at ground level at that end. And that entry door had a large glass window in it, which was the only natural light that went into the lower floor because it was mostly below grade. In fact, it was built out of ICF blocks, so the walls were solid poured concrete except for the openings for the doors. And this project, like most construction projects, was over budget and behind schedule, but by end of 2017, there was just a punch list of items that needed to be done. But Tim had moved on mentally and physically to other projects that he was trying to get closed in before winter set in earnest. So his crew, some of his crew would just come by when they had a few hours and work on this punch list. But I'd grown impatient and I'd started to move some of my tools and equipment in crates and boxes and cases into the back of the shop and stack them up waiting to unpack them. And I was parking some vehicles in there at night sometimes. And for that reason, I had some expensive stuff in there, so I was locking the doors, and that entry door had a key or a combination lock. And I'd given a key to my sister because she watches over my house sometimes when I'm out of town. And I'd set a combination on the combination lock so Tim's crew could get in there whenever they needed to, even if I wasn't around. And on the far end of that shop, facing away from my living room windows on the bottom story, were 2 8x10 overhead door brand garage doors with automatic openers and remote controls. And one morning I went down to the shop and one of those doors was up. And I thought it was kind of odd, but I thought maybe I'd forgotten to close it or one of Tim's crew had forgotten to close it. But it continued to happen. I'd go down to the shop in the morning and a door would be open. So I had a similar garage door in my house, and I had stopped by Overhead Door on College Road there, and they'd sold me a 3-button controller that would open all 3 of those doors, and I had programmed that controller myself. So I called up Overhead Door and had them send one of their factory-trained technicians over and had them inspect Tim's installation of the 2 doors in the shop and my programming of the remote control operator to make sure everything was working correctly. And they looked at all 3 doors, checked everything out, that everything was working correctly. But I would go down to the shop in the morning occasionally, and one of those doors would be up. So I decided to install a Nest security camera in the shop for the purpose, 2 things. One, I wanted to be able to, when I went to bed at night, look at the video camera and see whether the doors were down before I went to bed, since I had the Toyo boiler running and heat in the floor. And also, I wanted to see when the door was opening and see if it was correlated with something I was doing in the shop, like, or in the house, like, maybe opening the garage door in the house, had a fat finger and pressed one of the buttons for the shop door, or some other electrical equipment that was interfering with the garage doors. So I installed the camera on one of the 2 steel beams that held up the upper story, near the end where I could plug it into the wall. So it was about 8 feet up in the air and about 20-some feet back from the door, pointed at the 2 garage doors, took in the front half of the shop. And a few days later, well, for those of you who are not familiar with Nest security cameras, they have 3 functions. They capture a video image if they see any movement and record it. And they send you an email, and when you open that email, you press on a link, it loads the Nest app, and you can see the chronological list of saved images or look at the live video feed. 2, they have a built-in microphone and speaker, so you can talk with the intruder or hear noises that they're making. And 3, they have a infrared lighting system, so they can take a video in total darkness. The intruder doesn't see any light, but it can capture a full motion black and white video of slightly lower resolution, but it's still a very high quality video image. So some days after I'd installed this camera, I woke up in the morning and sure enough, there was an email from the camera. And so I looked at it, and in the middle of the night with the lights off, one of the doors just went up. There wasn't anybody there pushing the button on the wall. There wasn't anybody there with the remote control. It just went up. And I was sound asleep, of course, when this happened. So obviously, it wasn't because I was opening the garage door in the house or operating some other electrical equipment. So I thought, well, I'd just wait, for a few more days, and maybe it'd happen again, and I'd see some pattern to what time of night it was happening. So a few days later, I wake up in the morning, and there's a message from the camera. I look at it, and the lights are out, infrared lighting system's running, but the doors are down. But what I did see was even more astounding. They're suspended over or sitting on the hood of my pickup, which I had parked in the garage that night, was what I can only describe as a ghost, Casper the ghost. I think we're supposed to have an image of it here. And he looked like he was fully 6 or 7 feet tall, well-formed, symmetrical, a couple of eyes looking at the camera, a 3-part tail. Parts of his body were translucent. You could see things behind him. Parts of his body were opaque. It blocked what was behind him. And Casper just appeared in the video from a point in space, expanded to this size, and then just sat motionless on the hood of the pickup for several seconds, and then shrunk down and disappeared. I mean, I was speechless. What could this possibly be in my shop? And then I thought, I wonder if this could have anything to do with the garage doors opening at night. From what little I knew about ghosts then and now, as far as I knew, they could pass through solid objects. So why would he need to open a door? But the walls are solid concrete with steel reinforcement, so maybe it's easier to open the door. So I didn't say much of anything to anybody. I mentioned it to my sister and my daughter and son-in-law who lived right down the road from me, because I'd been telling them I was having a problem with my doors going up uncommanded. But I didn't say anything to anybody else. I mean, this is not something you want your neighbors talking about. Like, did you know Art's got a ghost in his garage? I mean, this could affect the resale value of your house. So I thought I just needed to, get a plan and figure out what this was all about. And so while I was thinking about it, a few days later, I woke up in the morning, and there was a message from the camera. So I opened the link, and the doors are down. It was the middle of the night. Casper wasn't there, but there was what looked like a hammock or some kind of a chaise lounge hanging in the middle of my shop. I didn't have a car in there that night, so it's hanging out in the middle of the shop. It looked like there was maybe one line going up to a hinge on the garage door, maybe suspending one corner of it, but otherwise it was just hanging in the middle of the garage. And it looked like, maybe Casper was trying out some furniture in there and planning on a long-term stay and wanted to be more comfortable or something. And it, like Casper, had just appeared from nowhere, grew to this size, hung motionless in the middle of my shop for several seconds, and then just shrunk down and disappeared. So at this point, I thought, I got to get some professional advice on what this is. So I took these 2 images that you've seen there, and I put them in an email, and I sent them to Nest Support. And And I asked them, I said, could there possibly be some kind of a defect in the camera that would cause this sort of an image? Or, have you gotten an image like this from some of your other customers? And what was it if you did? And surprisingly, the next day I got an email back from Nest. And they assured me that there couldn't be anything wrong with the camera that would cause these kinds of images. But he said, I'm sorry, we can't help you. We've never seen images like this from our cameras before. So with the mystery kind of deepening, I decided I need to get a three-dimensional look at whatever is out there. So I need another camera. So I went over to I went over to Home Depot and I bought another camera. And I mounted the magnetic base for that on top of my Toyo stove, which was in the opposite corner of the shop from the entry door. And I set it up so it could not only see the two garage doors out of its peripheral vision, but it was looking back directly at camera number 1. So anything that was in the field of view of camera 1 was also in the field of view of camera 2. And so I set my ghost strap, and I waited. Well, a few nights later, my good friend Spike Jorgensen from Tok stopped by for a visit, about 9 p.m. at night. And Spike and I can usually solve most of the political and economic and religious problems of the world in a few hours. And this night was no exception. And about 1:30 in the morning, we'd killed most of a bottle of wine when my phone beeped. And I looked at it, and sure enough, something was happening in the shop. So Spike and I looked at the video, and with the lights off down there, here's Casper appears, and he's flitting around the shop, and then he just disappeared. He was just there for a few seconds. And so as we were looking at it, I realized there'd been another image recorded earlier that I had missed. So we clicked on that, and it turned out that an image had been captured when Spike had arrived at 9 p.m., and he has some big moose lights mounted on the top of his pickup, to illuminate the ditches when he's driving back and forth to Tok. And as he had driven in, that light had swept across the left side of the garage and gone through the window on the entry door. And it had triggered camera number 1 to take a picture. So we looked at it. The lights were off in the shop, and the camera was in black and white mode because it takes quite a while for them to shift back into natural light mode. And as we looked at that, there was nothing in the shop that night. There was no vehicles. The doors were down. There was no ghosts. Nothing was going on. But front and center in the image on the floor was a 25-foot extension cord. One of those light blue Arctic extension cords that you buy at Costco to plug your headbolt heater in. I actually never buy them. I just pick them up along the road where people lose them. And they forget to unplug their headbolt heater when they leave work. And this cord was a stolen cord. It had a previous owner. So we then clicked back to the image of Casper, and we suddenly realized that in the picture taken at 1:30 in the morning, that extension cord was nowhere to be seen. It wasn't anywhere in the image. So then we looked at camera number 2 to get the 3D image see what was going on down there, and we looked at that, and it too had captured an image at 9 p.m. when Spike had come in from its angle, and it confirmed that the extension cord was the only thing in the image. I mean, it was obvious in the middle of the floor. But camera number 2 hadn't captured a picture of Casper at 1:30 in the morning. So we looked at the real-time video from camera number 2, and it confirmed that it could see the extension cord nowhere in the shop. That extension cord was gone. So we had incontrovertible evidence that it was there. 2 cameras saw the extension cord at 9 p.m. Neither Spike or I had gone down to the shop and moved anything. And we were sitting in my living room. I have a big picture window that looks out on the shop. It has no curtains, no shades. If somebody else had come, if Tim had come by to pick up something and picked up the cord, we would have seen him, and the camera should have captured it. And so at 1:30 in the morning, confirmation from both cameras it wasn't there, but camera number 2 couldn't see Casper. It was invisible. Casper was invisible. So we're looking at these pictures wondering what could possibly be going on here, and I suddenly realized this is the first time I had seen a video of Casper in real time. I mean, he'd been in the shop moments before, he could still be in the back of the shop, just out of view of the cameras. And neither Spike or I mentioned the possibility of walking the 100 feet down to the shop and, taking a look with our own eyes and seeing what was going on down there. It was one of those nights in the fall when we have the darkest nights of the year, when there's no snow on the ground yet to reflect even starlight in this moonless night. There's no clouds to reflect the city lights. It was a very dark night. And Spike looked at his watch, and noting the late hour, he said, I need to get back over to Chena Marina, where I'm staying with Dave Sowards tonight. And he left. And I knew what I needed to do while the evidence was still fresh. I needed to go look for that extension cord and see if Casper was still in the back of the shop. I needed to go down to the shop alone in the dark and look for the ghost. So I poured the rest of the wine into my glass and I chugged it down in a couple of gulps. But the liquid courage didn't have much impact. And instead, I went down to my front door and I twisted the lock on my triple latches and drove them into the deadbolt position. And I went to the back door and I locked my patio doors. And I was painfully aware that anything outside could see me through my curtainless windows as I walked around in the living room with my lights on. So I shut the lights off and I went to my bedroom and I checked the .357 Magnum revolver I keep on the headboard of my bed just to make sure that those bullets hadn't disappeared out of the cylinder. And I got undressed and I slid into the cold sheets and I stared at the ceiling and thought, I'd never actually heard of a successful defense with locked doors and a gun against a ghost. But pretty soon the wine kicked in and did its job and I drifted off to sleep. Well, I woke late the next morning and the bright fall sunshine was streaming in through my east-facing window, and I got up and took a shower and made a fire in the Blaze King and cooked some oatmeal and drank a cup of coffee. But I knew what had to be done. I had to go down to the shop and look see if there was any residue, any evidence from the activities there the night before, maybe a moist feel in the air or an odd smell. Maybe the smell of an overheated rubber extension cord or something. So I went down to the shop, and this time I had my .500 Smith & Wesson in my hand. And I knew the bullet wasn't going to do anything against the ghost, but I thought maybe, the muzzle blast and the shock wave and the tremendous blade of flame that comes out of that massive cartridge might just vaporize a ghost. So as I approached the door, I didn't see the cord anywhere outside, and I tried to look in, but I just saw my reflection in the window, so I opened the door and I pushed it open a little bit, and the sunlight flooded into the front, and I didn't see anything. There was no ghost there. I didn't see the extension cord, but my eyes were drawn to the back of the shop where there weren't any windows, and it was dark in the shadows back there. And so I reached around the door casing, I flicked on the lights, and bright fluorescent lights filled up the back of the shop, but there was no ghost back there. I didn't see the extension cord, just all my tools and equipment piled up there waiting to be unpacked. So I pushed the door open and I walked in and I gazed back to the front of the shop and the hair stood up on the back of my neck because right there in plain sight on the floor in front of me was the extension cord. Somebody, somehow, that cord had come back.
Well, by now, you've probably figured out that my brother was obsessed with that supposed ghost in his garage that year. And every time I talked to him, I would get the latest on the ghost, whether I wanted to hear it or not. And I could accept that. But when he started talking about having to get another camera so he could see it in 3 dimensions, frankly, I thought he'd gone over the edge. But then one day in early September, I got an idea. How much fun would it be to give him a real 3-dimensional ghost in his garage? I could do that. But I needed a couple of things to be true. First, I needed my brother to leave his house for a reliable amount of time, a situation in where he could get a message from his camera through his phone that something was going on in his shop, but where he couldn't respond right away. And then I also wanted to do it before there was snow on the ground, because I didn't want to leave any tracks, because with my knowledge of ghosts is that they wouldn't leave tracks. But I thought I had plenty of time, but my brother stuck to his house like glue that fall, and he didn't go anywhere, at least nowhere that he told me. And by mid-October, there was snow on the ground, and it just didn't seem like things were going to come together. But then the third week in October, it rained, and it melted the snow, so there were just little patches you could step around. And I got wind of the fact that Art was going to Anchorage for a day, returning on the 8 p.m. Frontier flight. So this was my chance. So at this time, our mom was 102, and she lived in the Pioneers' home. And one of her favorite things to do was have me come and get her, take her to Mocha Dan's, get a coffee, and then we would go over to Art's house, and he would come out and sit in the car, and he and I would visit, and Mom would sit there with her eyes closed, drinking her coffee, and periodically interjecting a comment, or more likely a correction, into our conversation. So I thought this would be my perfect alibi. So about 6 o'clock the night that Art was in Anchorage and I was gonna go up to his house, I texted him and I said, I brought Mom by to see you, but I forgot you were in Anchorage, so I'm taking her back to the Pioneers' home and I'm going home. It would have been the perfect alibi, but I forgot to push send. And also I should tell you that Art's daughter and son-in-law, Kylan and Andrew, lived just down the road from him. And they too had heard the ghost story ad nauseum that summer. And when I got my idea in September, I divulged it to them and they thought it was a great plan. So before I left the house that night, I contacted them. First I wanted to let them know what I was up to. And then I thought they might want to be involved. But they, fortunately for them, had planned a dinner date, and they were going to be at a restaurant. So about 6:30, I left my house and drove up to my brother's house. Now, something else that you might have noticed about Art is that he's also obsessed with his security cameras. And I knew he had a lot of them. I didn't know where they were, and I didn't know what they saw, but I didn't want to take any chances, so I parked at the end of his long, curving driveway. And I got out of the car, and then I put on my all-white ghost attire. And my bunny boots. And then I put the sheet over my head. And that was my first major setback. I thought it would be transparent, or at least translucent, but it was opaque. I couldn't see anything. So I basically had to kind of surreptitiously lift up one corner and crab walk for 200 to 300 feet, kind of like this. And when I got to his shop, I unlocked the door, and luckily I left the door open just a little bit because it was dim outside, but it was really dark in his shop. I couldn't see anything. And so I went in and I floated around mysteriously for not very long until my very solid head hit the rear view mirror of my brother's truck. And at that point, a very loud voice came out of the dark.
Get the hell out of my shop. This is God speaking.
Well, I knew it wasn't God. But I also knew that my brother was now aware that he had a full three-dimensional ghost at loose in his garage. And so I opened and closed the door of his truck a couple times just for effect, and then I floated out and hightailed it, crab fashion, back to my car. And when I got to the car and took off my sheet, I saw that I had a text, and it was from Kylan. And she said, "Dad has already called us. He's pretty excited." He thinks there's somebody in his shop dressed in a sheet stealing his stuff. So I texted back and said, "Perfect, but would you guys stop on your way home and lock the shop because I forgot to." And then I also noticed the text that I had forgotten to send. And its value, as an alibi had diminished significantly, but I sent it anyway. And then I saw that there was a very short gobbledygook text from my brother that he had sent just a couple minutes before. And he said something like, "I assume you know what's going on in my shop. I hope you're not involved. I might have to call the troopers," Like he would call the troopers. But it was, it was getting well past 7, and I didn't want to be there or anywhere nearby when Art got home, because I didn't want him to even see me on the road, because I didn't want him to have any idea the identity of the three-dimensional ghost. And I wasn't trying to drive my brother insane, but I was just curious to see what his next move was going to be. He had pretty much exhausted the number of dimensions he needed to be worried about. And I didn't know, maybe cameras from the ceiling, or maybe trying to recruit his grandsons to come up and stake the place out with him at night. But whatever it was, I thought it was going to be fun to watch. So I threw my sheet in the back of the car, and I drove home. And on the way home, I burst out laughing repeatedly, thinking how clever I was, how funny I was, and what a perfect trick I had played on my very unsuspecting baby brother.
So I was down at the north end of the Anchorage International Airport terminals in the old A gates waiting for the Frontier flight back to Fairbanks. And that was when Frontier was flying Beech 1900s, and there was no provision for carry-on bags, so I checked my only bag. And I was standing in the boarding queue there. The plane was supposed to leave in a few minutes, and my phone beeped. And I looked, and sure enough, something was going on in my shop back in Fairbanks. So I loaded the video feed and looked, and to my astonishment, the door swings open, the door that I'd locked when I left, and in walks somebody with a sheet over their head. So the only people that could open that door and get in other than me was my son-in-law, who had the combination, my sister, who had the key, and all of Tim's crew. Well, I immediately jumped to the conclusion that Tim must have a rogue mechanic, or a carpenter, maybe somebody that just fired today, and they had a grudge, and they knew that combination. They knew all that equipment I had stacked in the back of the shop, and they knew that there were cameras in there if they'd worked in there, so they'd need to, disguise their identity as they came in. and as they, cleaned out my shop and used my pickup to carry it all away. And they might have seen the keys in the ignition of the pickup and the garage door opener on the sun visor. I know you might think I'm paranoid to jump to that conclusion so quickly, but I had something similar to happen to me before. Many years before, I was building a cabin at Moose Mountain, and I'd hired an itinerant carpenter who I didn't know, but the price was right. And he'd installed a yellow pine tongue and groove floor for me in the cabin, and he'd stayed in the cabin for a couple weeks while he did it. Well, a couple months later, he showed up back there with a duplicate key, stole all my hand tools, 2 steel chainsaws, and my Martin hat. I wasn't going to let that happen again. So I could see the intruder clearly in the infrared light on the video camera, but I could tell that they couldn't see anything because they were feeling down the side of the pickup with their hand until their head bumped into the mirror. And as they ducked down under the mirror, I pressed the virtual button on the Nest app and I said, "Get the hell out of my shop. This is God speaking." Several of the other passengers that were standing in the in the boarding queue with me turned their head and looked at me curiously. So I stepped out of the boarding queue and out of earshot. And the intruder obviously was an atheist because the voice of God booming out of the darkness had no impact on him. And they continued to slide along the driver's side door, and then they opened the door, but then they were out of view of the camera, and I couldn't see them. And it was at that moment that I realized that the battery indicator on my phone had just changed from 3% to 2%. And I realized if I continued to watch this live video feed, I wouldn't have any battery power even to make a phone call. And my charger was in the bag that I'd checked. So I immediately shut off the video feed, and I called my son-in-law, who just lives down the street from me. And when Andrew answered, I quickly explained to him what was going on, and I asked him to go directly to my shop and apprehend the thief and before they stole all my tools and pickup. But Andrew said that he and Kylan and Landon and Luca, my 2 grandsons, had gone out for dinner, and they were even then sitting at Shogun's. I imagine watching the chef spin eggs on his spatula and squirt sake in their mouths. But he assured me that they would, as soon as they were done eating, they'd go up to the shop and see what was going on. Well, I didn't have time or battery power to debate it, so I just said, "Oh, okay," and I hung up. And then I thought about my sister. She's got a key to that door. So to conserve battery power, I texted her. And I said, it was short and to the point. I said, "Somebody's in my shop with a sheet over their head. If you know anything about it, I'm calling the troopers." And I pressed send. And within a minute, just a matter of seconds, I got a response back from her. And it was very casual. She said, "Oh, well, I went over to the Pioneers home and picked up our mom and got some coffee, and I went to your house, and then I realized you weren't there, so we drank the coffee, and I took Mom back and dropped her off, and I'm home now." What was she trying to tell me? Maybe she was trying to tell me she'd just been at my house, nobody was there, everything's okay, there's nothing to worry about. And surely she wouldn't have had any reason to go into my shop with a sheet over her head. Leave our 102-year-old mother in the car in the dark alone. It didn't seem responsive to my text. But I was out of time, and I was out of battery power. Everybody else had loaded on the airplane. The gate agent called out and asked me if I was going to Fairbanks. And I thought, if I get back to Fairbanks and I find that somebody has stolen all my equipment in my pickup while I watched them on a security camera and did nothing about it, I'd look like a fool. So I decided to act. So I dialed Alaska State Trooper Dispatch in Fairbanks, and I explained my dilemma to them.
Just as I drove in my garage and the door was coming down, my phone rang. And it was Kylan. And her voice was abnormally high-pitched. And she was talking much faster than usual. I won't even try to mimic the conversation here, but basically she said, Aunt Cyndie, we just came over to Dad's house to relock the shop door, and we drove in here, and there are 4 trooper cars and a university cop car here. There is a trooper on the deck of the shop panning the area with some kind of pistol, and we were afraid to drive in here, but we couldn't turn around. So we drove down toward the shop, and a trooper burst out the door of the shop with a big dog. They have a canine unit here looking for you, for the ghost. So Andrew kind of tried to indicate we're coming in peace so we wouldn't get shot. And he rolled down his window, and the trooper held the dog back, and Andrew said, I think I can explain what's going on here. And then he kind of threw me under the bus because he said, I think his sister and his daughter are playing a trick on him. Well, I instantly felt sick to my stomach, and I didn't feel that funny and clever anymore. And I felt maybe this is the stupidest thing I'd ever done. So, and several thoughts came to my mind, and the first one was, what if I was financially responsible for the cost to the state of Alaska of dispatching 4 troopers, a canine unit, and a university policeman to a crime scene, to a bogus crime scene, and to a bogus crime scene that I personally had created. I might, this is probably illegal, and I might have crossed the line between practical joke and criminal activity. I might be on the front page of the News Miner tomorrow, one of my worst fears. Or I might, even worse, be in jail trying to find an attorney to represent a person like me. And then there was the problem of my brother. We had always gotten along pretty well, but, he might not see the humor in this. And if he was mad at me, I really couldn't blame him, because you think about it. This made him look bad, and then really how many normal people, even in Fairbanks, would call the troopers and ask them to apprehend a ghost in their shop, stealing their stuff? So I decided the best thing to do was face the music. Decided I should probably just drive back over to Kylan and Andrew's. Their house was on the way from the airport to Art's house. And I figured Art would probably stop in. Well, I knew he would stop in. He would have the latest. He would be bursting with information about the 3-dimensional ghost in his garage. And I figured if he was really mad, there'd be safety in numbers. And if things got really heated, I might follow Andrew's lead and try to blame part of this off onto Kylan.
So when I arrived back in Fairbanks, my battery in my phone still had a gasp of power, so I called the troopers. And the dispatcher that answered gave the phone to one of the responding troopers who still happened to be standing there in dispatch. And so I breathlessly asked her, what did you find in my shop? And there was a long pause, and she said, I thought your family would have called you by now. So I drove back over to my house and plugged my phone in and charged it up, and then I realized that my video cameras had captured the assault on my shop by the troopers. And as the lady that I talked to on the phone in dispatch, she was the canine dog handler, and as she opened the door, flicked the lights on, shouted, "Alaska State Troopers," and turned a very large, very excited German Shepherd loose to hunt down the intruder, it was pretty impressive. And another trooper went up the exterior staircase to guard the upper doors in case the intruder went up the interior staircase and escaped out those doors. Well, while he was standing on the deck guarding that door, he suddenly noticed my 3 apple trees that I'd planted nearby. And I had wrapped those in the previous fall in white garden fabric to prevent the moose from eating them. White fabric that made the 7-foot-tall apple trees look pretty much like a person with a sheet over their head. And on the video, he kind of crouches down, draws his handgun, dashes forward, and traces the sights across the apple trees. I thought my apple trees were going to die in a hail of bullets. Well, it was the week before Halloween, so I had no problem stopping by Fred Meyer's the next morning and getting a ghost-themed Halloween card on which I wrote my apology and inserted the $100 gift certificate to the Cookie Jar restaurant and dropped it off at Trooper Dispatch. I didn't ask to talk to any of the responding troopers. So now you've heard all the events and images that happened that fall, and you probably maybe are drawing your own conclusions about what was really going on in my shop that fall. But when you think about that, let me tell you the epilogue to this story. A couple weeks later, I left Alaska for several months for my overseas traveling in the Southern Hemisphere. But before I left, I shut the circuit breakers off on those 2 garage doors, as I did for several years after these events had occurred. But in the 7 years since these events happened, those doors have never again opened uncommanded. Now, the mystery of the disappearing extension cord was solved. It turns out that light blue Arctic extension cord, when viewed under ultraviolet or infrared light in black and white, is exactly the same shade of gray as the concrete floor. And with a camera on each side, equidistant from it, shining infrared light on it, it casts no shadow. When Spike's lights flash through at 9 o'clock at night, even though the cameras are still in infrared mode and it was a black and white image, that additional natural light plus the shadows it created make the cord plainly visible. Later on, when I looked at it on a computer screen rather than my phone, you could faintly see the 2 larger angular molded plastic ends on the cord in the exact same positions as they were at 9 o'clock at night. The cord was there all the time. Now, what about the ghost? Some people have suggested that maybe that image of Casper could have been created by an insect, attracted by the heat of the infrared light that landed on the lens of the camera, and the camera couldn't focus on it at that range. So could the image, I think we're going to get those images up again, could the image of Casper have been created by an insect just landing on the lens of the camera? What do you think about that? What about Casper's hammock with its straight lines and sharp angles, seemingly hanging out in the middle of the shop, even with a cord going up to one of the hinges on the door? Could that be an insect sitting on the lens of the camera? And I have 5 other Nest security cameras around my shop and house, including camera number 1, the relevant camera that took all these images. It's still sitting on that steel beam as we speak here tonight. And in the last 7 years, that camera has never, ever captured an image like this again. It probably comes as no surprise that none of my cameras have ever captured an image of my sister in my garage with a sheet over her head again. So in closing, I'd just like to say that the Alaska State Troopers have seen some bloopers. But the strangest they ever did see was that dark winter night I played host to a sheet-covered counterfeit ghost. 'Twas my sister just messing with me. She thought she was clever and cool, made me look the fool. And as memories fade of that long ago date, she tells a story to all who will hear. Lives her life without fear. But the time and the place for revenge I await. Thank you.
I think if anyone wanted to have the Ocean's 11 experience, I know a shop you could try, but. All right, I was gonna read a couple more of these memories. It's warmed up to 20 below. The kids can have outside recess. Having 3 different kinds of snow shovels on your porch for scooping, shoveling, and chopping. 20 years ago, my 10-year-old son and I were looking out the window. A cow and calf came around the corner. The calf slipped and landed sitting in the orange plastic sled. Very properly rode down the hill in the sled. Then got up and walked away. All right. Another thing that's pretty Alaskan is the number of people who think they're moving here for just a year, right? I asked one of my high school teachers how she came to Alaska, and she was telling me back in the 70s she had a 1-year contract offer in Hawaii and a 1-year contract offer in Fairbanks. And she was trying to decide, and her friend said, well, do you look better in a swimsuit or a snowsuit? And then she taught here for 30 plus years. Our next storyteller also thought he was coming here for just 1 year. Please help us welcome to the stage Dave Dershin.
Wow, look at everybody here. So in 1994, my wife and I moved up here for a 1-year experience. She was going to be a hall director at Wickersham Hall at the university, and I had no plans except to pretty much mooch off her and live with her for the year. It was a good year for us. She was working on campus. I did the kinds of things you do when you have a free year and you're in your 20s in Alaska. I learned how to snowboard at Moose Mountain when it was closed, and we'd drive trucks up and go down at night. And learned how to do the same thing at Cleary Summit. There was an old ski place there. We learned how to sled at Haystack Mountain and not get hit by the cars as you came across the road at the bottom there. And things like that. We learned how to downhill ski, ice fish, all those different types of things. So a year later, my wife got a different job. She got a job in Wood Center, and we had to move off campus. And we decided, instead of renting something, we were gonna buy a cabin. So we decided to get a realtor, right? We wanted to live somewhere off campus. My wife said, nothing serious, we just want 5 acres in the woods with a mountain view. So I said, okay. So we called up a realtor, and he said, oh, I'll meet you guys, right? We'll show you some stuff. What's your budget? We had about $500. And so we said, $50,000 maybe? We didn't know what that meant at the time. And he said, no problem, I'll meet you. And he gave us an address, and we drove there, and we met him. And we went into this building, I don't know what you call it, a house. And we walked inside, and we opened the door, and there was a brown industrial carpeting. there was a drum set and an empty pizza box. And we looked at each other and said, no, I don't think this is the place for us. And he said, oh, I got a better place for you. My wife said, we really want to be, somewhere we have a good view. And he said, okay. And he took us to this place off in the woods. And it was actually a beautiful little house, but it was a duplex, right? So you shared a wall with somebody else, and it was very clear we didn't want to do that at the time. So then I think this might have all been a setup, because then he took us to a place over off of, I don't remember, Persinger or somewhere, not Persinger, off Chena Pump. And there was this beautiful little log house on a couple of acres, and it had a kitchen and a backyard and a loft bedroom and all this stuff. And it was $85,000, which was way, way out of our budget. So we said thank you, we'd be in touch, and in the car talked about maybe we should try to figure out a way to, I don't know how we would have afforded an $85,000 house at the time. So we looked in the paper, because back then that's how you found houses, you looked in the paper. And we were going down, and there out on the Hot Springs Road was this cabin for sale. It said log cabin for sale on 5 acres. And they wanted like $39,000. So we didn't have a cell phone, so we went somewhere, which I don't remember where we went. We actually had to find a real phone. We called this person. He said, come on out. We're just hanging out eating dinner. So we drove out the Hot Springs Road, and we pulled up the little side road. And actually, the property bordered the Hot Springs Road, but we had to drive up a side road to get into it, and we pull into the driveway. And as we're pulling in the driveway, I look off to the right, and there's a shop, and of course, the doors are wide open. And there's a table saw, and there's like a chop saw and a bandsaw. And I thought, oh, this is a cool place, right? And we drive a little further down the driveway, and off on the other side, there's a cold frame greenhouse and some raised garden beds. And this is like the middle of June, and so stuff is coming up. And they had a cold frame greenhouse that was just full of stuff that had been growing. I think we decided to buy the cabin before we actually walked into the cabin or even saw the cabin, because it just seemed very cool. So we pull in all the way in park, though, and this guy comes out on the deck. It wasn't really a deck, it was a small porch. And he's got a barbecued rib in one hand, and he's got barbecue sauce all over his face. And he says, hey, you guys here to look at the place? And we said, yeah. And so we climb up the stairs, up this little porch, and go into the house. And I'm about 6'1". And the door at the time didn't have a lock on it. It had like a deadbolt latch, or you put a padlock on the outside of it when you weren't there, that kind of place. It was a log house, log cabin, but it was definitely an Alaskan style place. So we step inside, and the ceiling was about 6'2". And it was okay, And it's a very small, maybe like a 16 by 16 little cabin with a little back room. And if you go in the back room, you had to sort of do this little duck thing to get into the back room, because it was an addition. But we loved the place, and they weren't stupid. They put the blueberry muffins in about a half an hour before we showed up. And this was gonna be our house, right? And it was a neat little place. The guy who built it was a tiny guy compared to me. And so he built it to conserve energy. It had a monitor, it had a wood stove, and when you turned the wood stove on, you had to open up the front door and a window because there wasn't enough oxygen in the place. But the monitor was good. And he had out behind the cabin, there was a chicken coop. So of course we had to get chickens, right? So there was a chicken coop, and then there was an old playhouse built up in the trees this was 1995. This thing was falling down in 1995 when we went in there, and we still loved it, He had tried to dig underneath the house a root cellar, but had changed his mind, and then off maybe, 30, 40 feet from the house had dug a root cellar to keep stuff in. He was a very organized guy, right? So we told the guy, we'd love to take the house, but I want to get it inspected. I thought I was a real adult for saying that. I want to get it inspected. We were pretty young, and we shook on it, and we left. And I didn't know who to call, so I looked in the phone book. Remember the phone book? Looked in the phone book and found somebody to inspect the house. And I called the guy. We went back over there, and went with the inspector. He said it was great. It was a solid place. And the guy said, well, that's great. And we started the process. And he said, by the way, I just want you to know, after you left, my neighbor came over and offered me cash for the place. But I told him we shook on it. So that's sort of the Alaskan thing, right? That was accepted. And so in the late summer of 95, July sometime, we moved into this little cabin and we lived there, and I finally got a job. I got a job teaching at Tanana Middle School at the time, so it was good. We had 2 incomes, and my wife was still working at the university, and I knew nothing about anything. This was a dry cabin, and we decided, hey, let's put a bathroom in it, right? So we put a bathroom in it. I hired a guy to put in a septic system, and I built the interior walls, and we put the bathroom and everything in, and then we, sprinkled seed out on the dirt where they had put the septic in and made an Alaskan lawn, which, as it grew up, we had to cut. But we didn't have a lawnmower, so we had a sickle, though. And I don't know if you've ever used a sickle. It works pretty well. And we used the sickle until a little bit later down the road. My wife and I think it was our first anniversary. I thought, the sickle's sort of hard to use. I should get my wife something off Tradio to make it easier for her. So I bought a used lawnmower for my wife that she had to sort of hit with a stick to keep running and stuff. But it was really a step up from the sickle. Anyway, we lived there for a bit, and other things we did that summer. You move to Alaska, you get a cabin, you got to get a dog. So we went to the pound and we got a dog, right? You got to do it. It's part of just the experience. So over the next couple of years, I had different jobs, and Carrie was still working at the university. We had an extra dog and stuff like that. And so we're sort of settled in. We had this neighbor. Everybody has to have the neighbor who helps you when you have no idea what you're doing. And so, I'd have a tree fall down, and I'd be like, oh, what do we do? So I'd go up to my neighbor, and he'd say, well, do you have a chainsaw? I'd say, no, you need to get a chainsaw. He'd tell you what kind of chainsaw to buy. Or in the winter, when we were scooping the snow with the scoop in the long driveway, he came down with his little plow truck and helped us out and stuff like that. So anyway, I guess it was late in the summer of 1997 or 98. I can't even tell you which year it was. One morning I wake up because the dogs are outside barking, and it's like 5 o'clock in the morning. And we're like, what the heck's going on? Well, you figure it's one of two things, right? You got a moose out there, or you got a dog out there, or you got a fox, or who knows what's out there, right? So I go out the door, and I'm really frustrated and angry. And I see nothing. I see my 2 dogs, and they're looking at me, wagging their tails, right? So I go back in, and I come back out again 2 minutes later because they're barking and barking and barking and barking. So I'm looking at the dogs, and now notice one of them's looking off in the distance, and I look off in the distance, and in sort of the grass out there, I see this little steam rise up from the ground. I thought, uh-oh, that's not supposed to be, right? So I go back inside, get on shoes and everything, and I walk out there. And it turns out in the grass back there was the root cellar. And the root cellar was built in about 1975. So this is 20 years later, right? This guy was very efficient, and he kept all of his stuff out there. We had opened the door and looked in there and closed it, and we weren't going in there. So I go over there to the root cellar, and there's a small hole in the top. It's not a very big hole. It's like a 3-foot hole, and this puff of steam comes out. And then I see the snout of a moose that is sticking its nose up, looking out at me. And I go back inside, and I tell my wife. And we have this discussion about what to do with the moose, part of which was, can we just shoot the moose in the hole? We could skin it, we get all this meat, and we can't get the moose out of the hole, right? So we had this conversation, and if you've met my wife, she likes to make decisions that are good decisions and always follows the rules. And so it was probably about 5:30 by now in the morning, called Fish and Wildlife. Nobody's at Fish and Wildlife 5:30 in the morning, right? So we called them at 5:30, we called them at 6. We thought maybe they're awake at 6. So about 8 o'clock in the morning, somebody picks up the phone, and we say, hey, we've got a root cellar, and there's a moose in it, and we need somebody to come help us get it out, because we don't know how to do this. And they said, oh, okay, I'll send out a wildlife trooper. And so this guy comes out, and he drives up in his truck, shows up about 8:30, 9 o'clock in the morning. By now, it's been 3.5 hours. I've spent a lot of time looking at the moose in the hole. My wife and I talked a lot about, you sure we can't shoot it? All those kinds of things. And he shows up, and sometimes it takes more than one person to like do something. One person will just look at things, but two people show up, you start doing things. And so we decided we had to take the roof off the root cellar, and it was a pretty old root cellar, and the two of us just sort of lifted and dragged it off, 10 feet away. And when the roof is off the root cellar, what you see is, and this is really gonna compliment the guy who built this place, because it was like a 7-foot deep, maybe 6 or 7 foot wide hole in the silt with perfectly vertical walls. And a 2-year-old moose sitting in the middle there, looking up at us. And I said, hey, can we shoot it? Right? And he said, no, you can't shoot the moose. I said, okay. So then we had this conversation about, can you tranquilize it, right? And he said, well, if we tranquilize it, we can't get it out. And I think I might have said something like, well, if we tranquilize it, we could shoot it, and then we could have to worry about getting it out, So we didn't do that. So we talked for a while, and these kind of situations, people just start to appear, they see somebody there. So my neighbor, Mike McCann, showed up, and he wanted to help, and other neighbors showed up. And so I think there were about 6 of us, with me and my wife and 4 other people there, and we decided we were gonna collapse the side of the root cellar so that the moose could just walk out, right? But it's a 7-foot deep hole. So I grabbed shovels, the trooper grabbed shovels, my neighbors grabbed shovels, and we start collapsing the side of this root cellar. And it's falling in, and it's looking pretty good, but we got down maybe, 3 or 4 feet, and there's some dirt in the bottom, and there's dirt up here, and the trooper, wildlife trooper says, hey, I have a ramp in my truck for my 4-wheeler. It's like plywood with metal grating on it. He said, we could just put that in the hole and the moose could just climb out it. I said, oh, great. So he pulls his 4-wheeler off, we take the ramp out, and we have collapsed this hole. It's probably like 11:30, 12 o'clock now. We've been going for hours. And we lowered this sheet of plywood. It's an 8.5 by, a 4x8 sheet of plywood with grating on it, and lowered into the hole. So you've got this giant hole with one side partially collapsed and this ramp. And the moose just stood off to the side. He didn't want to come up the ramp. He didn't ask to come up the ramp. He just stood there, had no interest in getting out of the hole. In fact, he was very calm, My wife got worried about him and got some broccoli from the garden, and, he's probably hungry, gave the moose some broccoli. And so then we started talking about, okay, the moose is not coming up the ramp on its own. What are we gonna do? So, I don't remember if it was a neighbor or the trooper. Somebody had a big length of heavy-duty rope. And we decided that if we could somehow get a rope around the moose, we could pull it out. And we had long conversations about slip knots and how we were gonna do this so that when the moose comes out of the hole, when it goes to leave, it can just leave and doesn't have to stop for us to untie anything. So we actually came up with a pretty good system, and we lowered like a loop, imagine a loop of rope down in the hole, sort of on one side of the moose. And I remember somebody laying down with a garden hoe, reaching under the moose and pulling the loop up, And I swear the moose just stood there. We talked about, could somebody actually go in the hole, The moose every once in a while would sort of work its way underneath the ramp a little bit and be a little complicated, but for the most part, he was a good moose. He did what he was supposed to do. So we've got this loop, right? And we run another like a slip knot, if you ever done sailing knots or anything like that. And we tied it to a tree, and so the idea was we're gonna pull this moose out. The 6 of us are gonna pull this moose out, and then when the moose goes to leave, the rope will just come off, and that'll be that. So the moose won't get on the ramp. So we have to sort of be a little aggressive, and people are poking at it with sticks from one side. And finally, this moose does sort of come onto the ramp, and it's a 2-year-old moose, so maybe 1,000 pounds, right? And the moose is on the ramp, and I remember it sort of laying down on the ramp, because it didn't stand up on the ramp. It just sort of was there. But we had it oriented the right direction, and we had the slip knot up under its belly and stuff, and we're pulling and pulling. and we pull, and the moose is actually moving up the ramp. This is very exciting. And then all of a sudden, the moose got its front hoofs on the dirt. And it sort of stood up, and it got that serious look on its face, and it started to go. And I jumped out of the way. Everybody just jumped out of the way. And this moose was going, whoosh, right? And it ran, and the rope came off, and it ran through the woods. And that's when I heard it. Squealing wheels and a big crash. It had run right out on Chena Hot Springs Road. So the trooper got on his four-wheeler and went around. I went down through the woods, running after where the moose had gone, and I came out on the road just in time to see the trooper putting it down with his sidearm. So I walked back up to the house, and everybody's up there, and they sort of get a sense for what's going on. You know, we have lots of conversations about what could we have done differently. I hunt, but it's something different when you've been spending 5 or 6 hours trying to save an animal, and it goes across the road and is hit very quickly. So I remember later that day or so, throwing all the debris from the roof into the root cellar, and then a couple of days later, a neighbor came by with a bobcat, and we sort of filled it in, and we had lots of conversations about why did we dig the hole on that side? Could we have done this? Should we have shot the moose in the hole? All the different things many different things we talked about, And to this day, when I tell this story, people give me lots of advice about what I should have done. I just asked that if you have good advice of what I could have done 27 years ago, maybe don't tell me. Maybe tell a friend of yours, And that's my story about the moose.
All right, it is time for intermission. So we're gonna do about 20 minutes for intermission. Hutchinson High School is here serving baked potatoes. I think some of those ghost images will be available if you wanna check them out a little bit more closely. And we also have someone from the Red Cross who's here giving out information. So have a nice intermission. We'll see you again in about 20 minutes.
Please welcome the West Valley Drama Club to the stage to perform a scene from their upcoming performance of Clue.
All righty. Ladies and gentlemen, the windows are locked, the doors are barred, and the grounds are patrolled by vicious dogs. There's no way out.
Locked?
What is it?
Ladies
and gentlemen, allow me to introduce your host for this evening and your blackmailer for life, Mr. Buddy.
How do you do?
You're the one who brought your phone.
Oh, Mrs. White in the study with her knee.
Thank you. I've studied martial arts. Yeah. There is one more piece of information you may all like to have.
What?
The police are coming.
The police are coming. This is not okay. Unless what?
You agreed to double down.
And why would we agree to that?
Because in this briefcase, I have all the information necessary to expose your wrongdoings. And I'll bring it to the police, the press and the House of Un-American Activities. With the right spin, those fellas can make a communist out of anyone. Some of you will face a lifetime of jail. Others, a lifetime of shame.
You
I can't believe it. Give us that. Unless what?
There is something else you could do for me. It would just change the game. Something I just can't bear to do myself.
What?
Take a seat, please.
What is this man on about?
Sorry. What is this about, sir?
I've brought 6 packages from Washington, and I thought our guests might find them useful this evening.
Packages.
Presents, if you will. I'm a generous sort of fellow.
Are you?
Wadsworth, can you please give our guests, their presents?
Gladly.
Any of you want to make a remark as to what you think are in these fantastic gifts?
Perfume?
Candy?
A rare single malt Scotch whiskey? That's oddly specific.
I love guessing games.
You are very pretty. Yeah.
Ladies first.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks.
Please, open them.
A candlestick? What's this for?
A wrench.
A lead pipe. A dagger. A revolver.
It's a snake! Oh, no. It's a rope.
In your hands, you each hold a lethal weapon. You all came here tonight because you believed that the evidence against you was so terrible, you would do almost anything to keep it a secret. And I'm putting that theory to the test.
You are?
Mr. Wadsworth here is the only other person who knows your secrets. And it's costing us all dearly to keep him quiet.
What do you mean by that?
I wouldn't have to double your payments if I didn't have to pay Mr. Wadsworth for his silence.
Wadsworth?
That's a lie!
He may look suave and charming,
Oh, thank you.
but in reality, he's conniving and manipulative.
False.
Why do you think he's called the police?
You called the police.
Only because he instructed me to do so.
Did I? If, ladies and gentlemen, if you can manage to somehow get rid of Mr. Wadsworth, perhaps I can find it in my heart to eliminate your blackmail.
Get rid of? Does he mean kill him?
If you can eliminate Mr. Wadsworth,
Yes.
perhaps I can find it in my heart to eliminate your blackmail once and for all.
You would never.
Why us, Body? Why don't you do the dirty work yourself?
Yeah.
Why should I, when the 6 of you are so uniquely motivated and armed?
What a patriot.
After all I've done for you. Don't listen to him, he's a liar. I'm not a butler, I'm one of you. I'm an indentured servant.
A familiar refrain. Don't make a scene, Wadsworth. It's over. Ladies and gentlemen, the police are on their way. Now's your chance. If you don't want to, I don't know, have your blackmail exposed or have it appear on the front paper, perhaps right about now would be fantastic if you killed Mr. Wadsworth.
Oh, thank goodness.
Is he breathing? Back up, I'm a doctor. Oh, you have so much to live for. He's dead.
Who killed him? Was it one of them? Was it me? If you want to find out, come to West Valley on March 29th and March 30th, April 5th and 6th and watch Clue on stage.
Oh, we did it. Oh, goodness. Hold on, wait.
Oh, dude.
It was all the butler. Excuse me. It was all the butler.
Oh, the butler.
It was all the butler.
All right. Thank you so much. Will you tell us all who you are?
We are the West Valley Drama Club.
Thank you. So it looks like you're performing Clue,
Is this the same as the Clue movie that a lot of us may have seen from the 80s?
No, this is very different from the Clue movie.
So if we know who did it in the Clue movie, it doesn't mean we know who did it in your play, and we should come find out? All right. How did you guys pick Clue for your play this year?
We had a choice between about three plays, but we ultimately voted on Clue.
Democracy. Love it. And I think you're the director.
Yes, I am.
Do you run a pretty tight ship? All right, I think that speaks for itself. One more time, if we want to see Clue, when and where should we come?
March 29th and 30th and April 5th and 6th at West Valley in the PAC at 7 p.m.
All right. You better take a bow. Do you have anything for me?
Oh, yes, I do, actually.
Oh boy, okay, I know what comes out of those. Oh, the audience storyteller name. Thank you so much. Before you go, we actually have something for you as well. So, we would like to make a donation to the West Valley Drama Club because we think it's very important. We want to make sure we keep supporting local arts. So thank you guys, you're the future. All right, I hold in my hand the name of the audience storyteller. Do we all remember the rules? Has to be true, has to have happened to you, has to have happened in Alaska, ideally 10 minutes or less. Please give it up for Steve Hovenden. I see him. All right, Steve. The carpet is your home, so. Perfect.
Well, it's been a very interesting evening here with some of the stories. It's going to get better in a couple minutes when I leave. I was at work. I wasn't bothering anybody. I was minding my own darn business. Many years ago, I survived Vietnam. I came back to Alaska. I got a chance to go to school and become a surveyor. Catch my breath here. And as such, I spent a lot of time working on the slope, on the pipeline, doing preliminary lines for the pipeline itself and for the road. And it was really some pretty good times. Back then, they would fly out to a job. We would be flown out, a four-man crew, to a place. And most of the time, they would come back and get you. So that was always healthy. We had one of our choppers was 00 whiskey, and when it was brand new, somebody put it in the water, and you never really knew if he was going to make it going or coming. At any rate, on an old survey crew like that, old time, there were four people. You had a party chief. No, he wasn't in charge of the party. You had an instrument man person who ran the instruments, and then you had the two guys that did the measuring. Most all of us could do the jobs interchangeably. So on this particular crew, it was in the spring of 1974. We were south of Galbraith Lake, north of Vatican, and we were doing cross sections. In other words, there's another crew come by, and they put stakes every 100 feet. We come along with a big, it's called a Philadelphia rod, a big measuring stick, and a cloth tape called a rag tape. It's 100 feet long. So the party chief is keeping his books, and the instrument man is giving the elevations. And on this particular crew, I was the head chainman. So I took this cloth tape. Excuse me. He got me all choked up here. And to free up my hands, I just tied the end of it to this big square Philadelphia rod, and we'd take a reading at that stake, and then every 20 feet and every dip. So the engineers could go back and calculate the cuts and fills. What do we have to remove? What do we have to fill to build either a pipeline pad or a road? And at this particular time, we took the shot on the stake, and I walked out 20 feet, and the cloth tape is tied. I have one end, and it's wrapped around the stake, and the rear chainman would stop me at 20 feet and then any other breaks. I got to 20 feet, and the party chief said, everybody take a break. I've got to catch up my book. So we flopped down in the tundra, and the gunner said, look at that. Oh. And down line, what we called the line, was this big, absolutely magnificent grayish-white female wolf. And she's following us. Well, I know where she is. I'm 20 feet away from the stake, and Wally's next to me, and there's the end of that rag tape. And that we're all just looking at it. And so this wolf comes up to the tape and looks at us. Looks at the tape and picked it up in her mouth and started a quarter away from us. And I'm watching this bounce across the top of the tundra, and I'm thinking, if this wolf takes off with this rag tape, we're kind of screwed for the rest of the day because we don't know where anything is. So I wrapped my hand around the end of that rag tape. And that wolf popped out there, and it got out. I know exactly, she's exactly 99 and a half feet away from me because I got half of it here. And that thing pulled up taut and popped out of her mouth, and she went straight up in the air and turned around, and now she's looking at me. And it was the most amazing 7 or 8 seconds, maybe 10, but let's just be conservative. It wasn't very long, but it was interesting. So she's looking at me. The tension on this thing has, caused this thing to kind of look like a snake. So she took a few steps over to it, and she picked it up and backed up. So, well, this is kind of fun. So I got to play tug of war with a wolf for a few seconds. And at some point, she just dropped it, gave me the look, and turned, never said a word, didn't bark, didn't bite, didn't do anything, and just kind of walked off. Now, the tundra up there, that part of the country, is about knee-high, shorter. There's no trees. We're all watching this go on, and she was gone. We couldn't find, she just disappeared. So that was the fun part of, I got to play tug of war with a wolf. Good.
We always wonder what would happen if no one puts their name in, but it's always amazing. All right, a couple more of these. Most Alaskan thing you've seen or said. A skiff dragging someone's house, not cabin, house, across Kachemak Bay. A flamethrower, legit World War II style at the South Cushman Range. A sign on a city office building in a remote village that said, "Office closed. Sorry for the inconvenience. The office will open again when the temperature gets above -50. Honey, is the toilet unfrozen yet?" And a raven flying over my truck with a full McDonald's bag in its mouth. And then I said, "Hey babe, wanna stop at Mickey D's?" These are really funny, and we've got gobs from you guys. So after the show, we're gonna type them up, and we'll either put them on Facebook or put them on the podcast or something, because I am loving these. All right, our next story, we've already kind of done, who believes in the paranormal, but how about fate? Our next storyteller has noticed a recurring set of circumstances throughout his life that kept bringing him back to Valdez, Alaska. Was it chance? Was it fate? Let's invite to the stage Pat Levy, and we're gonna actually do this as an interview because it is a little bit of a complicated story that spans about at least several decades. So, Pat Levy. We found the other microphone stand.
Should I tap on the microphone?
All right, so Pat, what first brought you up to Alaska?
Well, I come from a Coast Guard aviation family, and my father did 30 years in the Coast Guard. My older brother did 20 years in the Coast Guard, and I got out after 4 years. They kind of looked at me bad when I did that, but anyway, I got out of the Coast Guard after 4 years, and I'm sure many of you in the audience, have just an amazing story about how you came up to Alaska. Well, I came up to Alaska on a Coast Guard C-130 when I was in the Coast Guard, and so I flew into Valdez. And as we got close to the town, our airplane dropped down out of altitude, and we went through some thick clouds and came out kind of in a storm underneath the clouds. I could tell it was snowing really hard. And the crew on the Kodiak C-130 that I was on were kind of running around. And so I wasn't on a headset, so I stopped one of the guys and I said, "What's going on?" And he said, "Well, there's 17-foot high drifts of snow on the side of the runway, and we're looking for the tech order to see how wide the airplane is, because we're not sure if we're gonna fit or not, and so we might not be able to land." And I'm sure my mouth dropped open, and I freaked out a little bit, but we were able to land, fortunately, in Valdez, and the airplane taxied up to the terminal, and they just left the engines running because it was just a quick drop pad off in Valdez thing, and then take off and go back home to Kodiak. But anyway, they lowered the ramp on the back of the airplane, and I was bringing a communications station up to Valdez, and so I backed it off the airplane, and as soon as I hit the ice, I jackknifed the whole assembly. And as they were putting the ramp up on the airplane, I could see that they were all laughing at me and waving goodbye, and boy, it was pretty embarrassing. But I was 21 years old, and so I drove over to the fence to get out of the airport there, and a guy came out, let me out of the gate, and I rolled the window down, and I said, "Which way is town?" And he said, "Well, you go down this road, and you make a right at the yellow flashing light, and you can't miss it." And so I said, "Well, what happens if I drive past it?" And he said, "Well, you can't. Welcome to Alaska." And so that was how I got to Alaska. And so what we were doing was we were bringing a communications station that I was bringing up, and there was a radar trailer that was coming over from Groton, Connecticut, and then they were going to bring this travel trailer out. We were going out into Prince William Sound, where it leads into Port Valdez. That area is called the Narrows, and so there's a little point of land out in the Narrows called Potato Point, and so that's where we're going to take all these trailers to. And so I found out that I was there early by like 2 to 3 weeks. The radar trailer hadn't shown up yet, so they put me to work at the new vessel traffic center that they were building. And so while I was there, I found out there were like 10,000 people over at the oil terminal facility over there working on it, to get it built. And anyway, they were making a whole lot of money, and there was a whole lot of money in Valdez, and I wasn't making any of it. I think I made something like $7,200 that year or something like that. But anyway.
Did your communications trailer finally make it?
It did, yeah. And so what happened was one day the radar trailer arrived, and they told us to go down to the small boat harbor, and they loaded us all up on this huge landing craft. It was pretty cool. And they also put 2 front loaders on there too. And so we got underway out to Potato Point, and when they arrived at this big landing craft, just like World War II, the finest of D-Day movies, they hit the beach and the front door comes down and these 2 front loaders drive out, and they make a road up to the top of Potato Point, and they come back, they grab our trailers, take those up there, and then they went back and loaded up on the landing craft and left us there when the tide came in, and they took off. And so we started this temporary radar site out at Potato Point. And during the day, I'd kind of wander around out in the wilds of Alaska, and at night, I'd try to talk to my buddies down off of San Francisco flying missions there at the air station there. But I had never seen so much snow before. This was during the winter time, and it was pretty crazy. But
so how long were you stationed there at Potato Point?
well, originally this trip was supposed to take a week. But I ended up being there in Alaska for like a month. But finally, the big event happened where the first tanker came into Prince William Sound, and they had never tested this to see if a tanker could come in, go through the Narrows, and then miss Middle Rock, kind of out in the middle there, and turn and make it into Port Valdez and go to the oil terminal. And that's why the Coast Guard was there to make sure that this came off with no hitches. And it did. I was able to talk to the Coast Guard Vessel Traffic Center with my radio station, and then also talk with the vessel as it came through also. It was a success.
So then what happened?
I went back to San Francisco, and I had this great Alaskan adventure under my belt, and spent a little bit more time in the Coast Guard, and got out and went to school on the GI Bill, and started really starving to death, and realized that I really needed to get a job. So I opened up the newspaper and saw that there were some radio tech jobs in Panama. And so I applied for that, got an interview, and I thought, all right, I'm going to Panama. And went in there, and the guy told me right away that the jobs in Panama had fallen through, and they weren't available. And he said, but we're always looking for techs. And so we have some openings in other places. And he said, we've got an opening in New Orleans. And I went, nah, I grew up in the South. I'm not really interested in going back there. And he said, well, we've got an opening in San Francisco. And I went, nah, I just live there. I'm not interested in that. He said, well, we have an opening at a Coast Guard Vessel Traffic Center up in Valdez, Alaska. And I went, wow, when I was in the Coast Guard, and I actually helped start that Vessel Traffic Center there. And he said, well, son, do you know how to work on radar? And I said, well, yes, I've actually worked on a lot of aircraft radars. And he said, well, would you like to go back to Valdez? And I went, yeah, I do. I want to go back to Valdez. And that was it. So instead of Panama, I went the other direction and went to Valdez.
Back to Valdez.
Back to Valdez, yeah. And so when I got to Valdez, it was a lot different, than.
So what year is this now?
Yeah, so originally I'd gone up to Valdez in '77. This was now '79, and so it was a lot calmer of a place, not pipeline days anymore, but it still felt like it was a frontier town, and so that was pretty cool. But I worked on, there were 2 radar sites now that the Vessel Traffic Center had. One of them was in the small boat harbor, and that monitored the Alyeska oil terminal facility over there in the port. And then the other one was a newer, bigger radar that was out at Potato Point. And so out there, they could monitor the tanker one-way zone through the Narrows and all the way out through the Arm. And we used to monitor ice out in the end of the Arm out there that was coming out from Columbia Glacier. It was pretty cool.
Was there ever a close call?
Yeah, in fact, in 1980, not too long after I got there, during a winter storm, the tanker that was actually named Prince William Sound lost power in a storm out in Prince William Sound, and so it was the engines weren't working on it, and the storm was blowing it towards Naked Island, and it was fully loaded with crude oil, and out that far we couldn't see it on our radar system. And so tugs, since it was in a storm, tugs couldn't get lines onto the vessel and get it under tow. And it was estimated that the Prince William Sound, the tanker Prince William Sound, came within 30 minutes of running aground on Naked Island out there in Prince William Sound. And we were really happy when it actually regained power on its own. And we felt like we had really dodged a big bullet there. And so it didn't run aground, which was good. Also in 1980, though, one of my buddies, he was the Vessel Traffic Center ComTech, and I were talking about how really bad the commercial radio was in Valdez. Back in those days, like it was a frontier town, but back in those days, the only radio station was a rebroadcast radio station from Anchorage, and all they played was crappy pop music all the time. And it was really terrible, and you can only take so much of, Wham, Wake Me Up in the Morning Before I Go. And anyway, it was really terrible, but my buddy looked up and he said, "Hey, have you ever heard of public radio?" And I said, "No, I have not." And he explained it to me this way. He said, "What kind of music do you like?" And I said, "I like rock and roll." And he said, "Well, you can have your own rock and roll show. You can bring in records from home and play them on the public radio station." He goes, "I like jazz, so I'm going to bring in jazz records and have my own jazz show." I went, "God, that sounds great." And I'm in. And so we formed a board of directors to build a public radio station. Eric Nielsen, he made himself president, and I was the vice president. And it was pretty cool.
So it sounds like life on a super reliable radar system was pretty cushy.
It was really cushy.
How long did you work there?
Yeah. So then after about 5 years, word came down that the Coast Guard was going to terminate that cushy radar contract that I worked on, and what they were going to do instead was they were going to put up a smaller, a cheaper, lower power, less resolution radar that their own Coast Guard techs could work on. Well, I thought this was a huge mistake, and so I decided to speak out. And so I wrote letters to my legislators at the time. That was Ted Stevens and Frank Murkowski and Congressman Don Young. And in the letters, I mentioned about that tanker mishap, in 1980 with the tanker Prince William Sound. And I also told them that I thought that, putting in a lower power, less resolution radar was actually a downgrade to the system. And that something like this could really cause a disaster to happen in Prince William Sound. Well, so Congressman Young actually contacted the commandant of the Coast Guard and asked him, about this downgrade to the system there. And the admiral assured Congressman Young that he would never let anything bad happen out in Prince William Sound. And I went to the Chamber of Commerce in Valdez and was advocating for extending radar coverage out in Prince William Sound.
So what did they do?
Well, all that kind of just fell on deaf ears, and so I lost my job, and so Yeah, I lost my job, God. And anyway, so I decided to stay in Valdez, and I ended up getting a 2-year degree there at the Prince William Sound Community College, and ended up finishing building the radio station that we had actually started, KCHU Terminal Radio. And I'm proud to say that even our local Dan Bross, who works at KUAC, actually worked on that public radio station that I helped build. I'm pretty proud about that, actually. But, so what? That's right. Dan, if you're in the audience, no.
So I think this is probably a little bit like a Titanic story because we all know where it's going.
Yeah, so, yeah, unfortunately, this is kind of like a Titanic story, and we all know really what happened, that in March of 1989, which was 5 years after I'd lost my job, the tanker Exxon Valdez was fully loaded with crude oil, and the third mate Cousins was in control of the bridge on the vessel, and he called up the vessel traffic center and requested permission to deviate from the outbound traffic lane due to ice in the traffic lane. As we all know too, Captain Hazelwood was drunk and asleep down in his bunk, and the vessel traffic watchstander, who was now just a single civilian there, which the Coast Guard had further downgraded the vessel traffic center, called up the Exxon Valdez and gave them permission to deviate out of that outbound traffic lane. And then using the new low power radar, he quickly lost contact with the Exxon Valdez. And so the 80-something foot high chunk of steel, less than 13 miles from Potato Point, ran aground on Bly Reef. And we had that tanker disaster that the Admiral had assured Congressman Young that he would never let anything bad happen.
So this is 5 years from when you lost your job. Where were you living now, and how did you?
I was here. I was in Fairbanks. And in fact, I was up at UAF Yak Estates going to college. Well, and so that morning of the spill, the Alaska State Troopers called me up at my apartment, and which that was shocking in itself to be called up by the Alaska State Troopers, and and they informed me that there had been an accident in Prince William Sound, and they said that they understood that I knew something about the radar system in Valdez, and that they wanted to talk to me before CNN and French TV got a hold of me. And I was like, wow, what a thing to wake up to in the morning. And so I went down to the Alaska State Trooper office here in Fairbanks, and the officer confided in me that he was used to actually interviewing criminals, and he didn't really know what to say to me, and so I bled my heart out into his tape recorder, and since he didn't really know what to ask me, and so then it was just kind of weird. After that, I made the front page of the Valdez Vanguard. That government knew about radar was the title of the story, and then a herd of attorneys grabbed me and sent me to Anchorage to do a deposition there. And when I arrived in Anchorage, one of the attorneys said, hey, why don't you meet me in the Captain Cook Hotel bar? And I said, okay. And so I got there, and he was with somebody else. And the guy introduced himself really loudly as Captain Hazelwood's attorney. And I quickly looked around the bar, and I said, hey, could you please not say Hazelwood's name again? Because I was worried we were going to get beat up. And but anyway, I was found out to my horror that I was actually supporting Hazelwood's case with the grounding of the Exxon Valdez and the spilling of 11 million gallons of oil. That was a little bit of a disappointment to me. Yeah.
So the troopers interviewed you. A bunch of lawyers flew to Anchorage to interview you. Then what happened?
Good question.
I think you're still a student at UAF.
Yeah, I was still a student at UAF, and I'm glad you said that too, because I just could not wait to get out of spring semester at UAF, to go down to the spill. Thank you, Brittany. You're doing a great job. But I couldn't wait to get out of there, and I think everybody else in Alaska was doing the same thing too, going down to work on the spill. My first job on the spill was I was a night watchman at the sea otter pathology lab. And unfortunately, the sea otters were getting oiled and they were drowning. And so that was really a drag. Fortunately, that job was really short-lived, and I got hired by VICO as a radio tech to work at the Exxon VICO Valdez Dispatch Center. Boy, that's really a tongue twister. But anyway, so at the Valdez Dispatch Center, it was out on the container dock in town that was union controlled. And what we did was we were working where they built all the barges to go out to the task forces to work on the spill. And we kind of controlled all the traffic all over everywhere.
So what was working on the spill like? Did you see crazy stuff?
Yeah, crazy stuff was going on pretty much every day. I walked out of the office one night. I was working night shift from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. and walked out of the office, and there was a longshoreman putting a pickup truck on the top of a building with his forklift. And I wasn't sure what was going on with that, but I quickly looked over at my car to make sure that it was still in the parking lot, and it was. That was really a good thing. But also, I found out at one point that I could actually order stuff from the Norcon warehouse, and so I ordered a bunch of candy, and so when they delivered my order, it was on the back of a flatbed pickup truck. And all the cases of Reese's peanut butter cups and Snickers and licorice and all that stuff was on a pallet. And I realized that, wow, I've really ordered too much. And that I was worried I was going to get in trouble. But at one point, Exxon sent me out to Sleepy Bay. And remember, the way the oil spill functioned was, the Exxon Valdez ran aground on Rocky Point, released out 11 million gallons of oil, and then the oil slick kind of went around the sound. It went up Night Passage, hit Sleepy Bay, and then it left Prince William Sound out into the Gulf of Alaska and headed to Kodiak. Well, when I got to Sleepy Bay, it was really bad, really heavily oiled. They had backhoes down on the beach that were digging holes in the beach so that they could pump the oil out that was collecting in those holes. But God, it was really bad. But we did that. We cleaned up the sound, as best we could, and I'm proud to say that we did as much as we did. I think any oil that was removed was a good thing.
So.
Oh, well, I was going to think if there's anybody out there, which I'm sure there are a lot of people here from Fairbanks that went down and worked on the spill. We really didn't get much of a thanking when we got back, but thank you very much for the work that you did out there too. But anyway.
I'm gonna clap for that. So after the spill, what happened? Was it hard to adjust?
It was, yeah. So after the spill, they pretty much what they did was in the winter there of '89, when the spill started winding down. We demobilized all the task forces, we tore them down, and everybody came back to Valdez and started dispersing back home. I went back to Fairbanks and tried to readjust after working on that. That was weird, working on the spill. But anyway, I had two wonderful daughters, Rachel and Sarah, and then my marriage fell apart. And, I felt like I'd gone full circle, though, from seeing the first tanker come into Prince William Sound to trying to stop a tanker disaster to actually working on the worst tanker disaster in U.S. history. And it was really kind of hard to wind down from that. But then about 20 years, right? I think it was about 20 years after Anyway, about 20 years ago from today, I went over to a friend of mine's house, Dick Flaherty. He had an every Thursday night barbecue. Yeah, Dick. Some people know Dick, yeah. What a great guy. But anyway, I went over to Dick's every Thursday night barbecue, and one of my other friends came over, Ann Biberman. Probably a lot of people know her too. But anyway, she brought in a bunch of new faces to Dick's that night, and I'll never forget that she came up to me and said, "Hey Pat, this is Lori Neufeld. We just hired her at KUAC," and so then she looked over at Lori and said, "You know, Pat's got a long history of public radio in Alaska," and which that made me feel good. And then Lori and I actually became quick friends after that and started dating, and then we got married 10 years ago, and so that was pretty cool. But thanks.
All right, so how does fate play into this whole story?
Yeah, you know, I used to think that it was all the potato thing, you know, that, you know, I went to Potato Point twice and then came up to Fairbanks and started making a potato vodka. You know, but then the real thing was that I do believe in fate. And I think that fate is a funny thing. And for the longest time, I used to think that fate had brought me up to Alaska to try to stop an oil spill. But if that was the case, we failed miserably. You know, that I didn't stop an oil spill. And so I have a lot of pride in that I did go and help work on it. And I tried to stop an oil spill. But anyway, I think what fate had in mind for me was maybe building a public radio station in Valdez. That through that public radio station, I'd actually been introduced to the woman that I would marry. And also that the public radio station in Valdez has been serving Valdez and Alaska for the last 39 years. And I'm pretty proud of that. It's still going strong. But thank you, everybody. You guys are an incredible audience, and thank you for listening to my story. Thanks. Oh.
I think Pat said that they have that actual Valdez paper, and he's put it up in the distillery. So if you're in there, go check it out. And I think we're also going to post it on Facebook, too. I'm going to read just a couple more of these. I'll be into work when this bull moose lets me get to my car. I could literally tell the difference in daylight today over yesterday. This is timely. A beaver was trying to drown my dog at Olness Pond. I had to fend it off with nothing but my hot pink retractable leash. This chicken tastes like lynx. All right, we have one more story tonight. But really quickly, I do want to just take a minute to thank all the people who make this show possible. First, I would like to thank the Red Hackle Pipe Band and the West Valley High School Drama Club. We want to thank the Herring Auditorium staff, including Deidre and Maite. And also Josh Bennett and the Sound Reinforcement Specialist crew who make us sound great. We'd like to thank our sponsors, In My Element, the High Life Connoisseurs, Fairbanks Distilling Company, and KUAC. We'd like to thank our nonprofit group, the North Star Community Foundation. And thank you to all the amazing volunteers who helped us tonight. So Paula Ruckhouse, Ellen Weiser, David Weissman, Nick Napoli, Eve de Angremont, Max Hanft, Bai Valentine, Janet Vreeman, Laurel Valentine, Flora Roddy, Cody Dean, Ksenia, Liz Parr, Heather Pritchard with the Red Cross Volunteers, Mary Beth Lee, Katie Ott, and the parents of the West Valley High School Club. All right, for our last story tonight, we were all teenagers once, and maybe, do we have any teenagers tonight? So, the older of us know that sometimes as a teenager, we're not quite yet equipped to handle some of the unexpected situations that come our way. Our next storyteller is a born and raised Fairbanksan telling us a hilarious high school date that he went on in the 80s. Please help me welcome to the stage, Bruce Miller.
So, my date happened in March of 1984. I was 16, almost 17. It's going to be turning 17 pretty soon. And this girl mattered. I had to go lower the mic. Closer. Yeah. All right. See, I was worried about booming you out. So, okay, this is good. Okay, so this girl, I had to go big. You know, this was a girl I really had a crush on, and she deserved so much more than McDonald's or Pizza Hut or a movie, right? And so I decided to just blow the budget and take her to the It restaurant in Fairbanks in the 80s. So, how many in the audience, by show of applause, remember Clinker Daggers, Bickerstaff, and Pets? I am so glad to see that we have a very healthy representation of boomers and Gen X. Thank you. So, for those of you that don't know, Clinks, as it was known, was a restaurant that was located over in Bentley Mall. So you have Office Max and then that satellite building with Starbucks. It used to be in between those two buildings. And it faced west, so it got the evening sun. And it was a great restaurant. It was super popular in the 80s and 90s. And it was basically patterned off of an old English pub, you know, like a medieval pub. And so the servers, the women were dressed in these short skirts and they had long white nylons. They looked like serving wenches. And the men had knickers and they had the tall white nylon socks and they were like pages or squires, and all of them were just ridiculously good looking. And it had a great food, great atmosphere. It was just the it place. So I called, made a reservation, and I specifically asked for a booth because it's just more intimate, quieter. This was a first date. I'm trying to do everything I possibly can to just make that wow factor, right? So we go there, and as you walk in, they even had a sign up there, Ye Old Brew Pub. And you walk in, there's the hostess, and to the right was a bar. And then she would take you in, and it would be a large open area with open seating, but along the perimeter were the booths. So she takes us and seats us, and our server comes, and we're going all out, so it's appetizers, entree, dessert, it's everything, the full meal deal. And I gotta tell you, it was a wonderful date. We were laughing and telling jokes, and it was just it was so easy. It was so relaxed. It's so not what you think of with a high school date where it's just, it was nothing like that. We just were having fun, right? And so we had our entree, and the server came and took our dessert order, coffee and dessert. And right after she left, I excused myself to go to the restroom, and which was back out by the hostess bar. So I go out, go to the restroom, take care of business, and I'm coming back out, and it dawns on me, wait, the hostess bar, we've already ordered dessert. We're not gonna be getting anything more. This is an opportunity for me to just look like I'm in charge, I am proactive. I'm gonna pay the bill now, so that when it comes time, it's just like, oh no, honey, it's taken care of. It's good. I've got this, right? So, no, it's not, we're not there yet. So I go back and sit down, and just moments after I sit down, the server brings our dessert, and we continue this wonderful date. And I'm not saying that I had picked out our children's names, but I did have a 5-acre parcel of land that I had my eyes set on. And I'm going, and we're chatting, and she was talking about something, and then it was just, oh, God. And it just, I felt something off. I'm like, oh, and I realized, my flies unzipped. I did not. And I mean, this is high school, right? And so any sort of, source of embarrassment is just, you can't survive that. But then it's like, wait, no, wait. I'll just wait. My face is just, keep it cool. Just keep it cool, be cool. Inside, I'm just like, oh my God, you idiot. It's 3 steps. Unzip, take care of business, zip up. How hard can that be? But here I am, screwing that up. So, I'm just biding my time. And then, just a stroke of luck, in restaurants, especially like a Friday or Saturday night dinner service, it's loud, and so something happened and it distracted her, and so, I'm good. I am back, yes. Whew. All right, this date is back on track. And one thing I need to tell you about clinks that is very unusual is their cutlery, their dinner service, the plates, the saucers, the mugs were these thick, heavy, pewter things. These things were so stout, you could use a plate as a hammer. Never in the history of that restaurant did they ever have a broken plate, all right? And another thing that was kind of unique about, a little different about that restaurant was, you had the open area, the booze, and the kitchen was semi-visible. You could see the cooks, just chest up. You couldn't see what they were working on, but you saw them, right? So, just like everything, all good things in life, must come to an end, and this date is concluding, and it's a natural conclusion. So it's time to leave. Well, me being the 16-year-old hormonal-filled, hard-charging ADHD kid, there is no, kind of scoot out of the booth. It is, you're sitting here, now it's time to go. That's just how it works, right? That is when I took the entire tablecloth with me. Everything. I zipped it right on up. Yeah, everything. Just, yeah. Keep going. I still hadn't really recovered yet. And I'm sitting there, and remember how I told you about those heavy pewter everything? Oh my God, those stupid things hit the floor, and they somersaulted and hit the floor again, and somersaulted and hit the floor again, making just the loudest possible noise with every contact. It sounded like a 5-year-old on a drum set. And by now, I have dumped almost as big of a load of adrenaline as I have right now then. And so time has stood still. It is just completely frozen. There is no motion. I'm vaguely aware of the sound, but it is just completely frozen. And I see 6 feet of cloth sticking out of my crotch. I look at my date, and she is just catatonic. She is doing everything to be as invisible as she possibly could. And frankly, I can't blame her. She didn't sign up for this. Neither one of us did. And I look out into the patrons and the servers, and there was one unifying theme of what I saw that night. Just to make sure you see. Everyone, jaws down, eyes like saucers, frozen. Just millions of images are embossed in my brain. And I'm 16 years old, and this is not exactly the kind of things we're prepared for. We're not exactly equipped to handle this kind of social phenomena with an event like this. It is, strictly speaking, it is just not in my wheelhouse. What I did have in my wheelhouse as a 16-year-old was that the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. Yeah, that was in my wheelhouse. It did nothing for me. It was useless. The one time I thought it would shine, and it was useless. And so I'm sitting there, and did I tell you about the 6 feet of cloth sticking out of my crotch? And I look at her, and I'm just, oh my gosh. Time is still frozen, but I still realize of how massive of a hole I am in right now, but I just, like a flash, like that green flash, I realized something. I paid the bill. There is nothing keeping us here. We don't have to be here any longer. I just have to figure a way out. So, me and my cloth, we've become one, one with my cloth. And if you hadn't noticed, you might have figured out. I possibly could have been a little cocky back then. I did the only thing I could do. I grabbed that thing, flipped it over my shoulder, and I wore it like a proud tartan, like I was about to join the Red Hackle group. I was ready to join them, right? So I'm now wearing it. So more importantly, I am mobile now. And I'm starting to formulate a plan here. And I look over, my date is still catatonic. And I'm trying to be sensitive to her, because it's like, I know, she is frozen in fear. She's in heels. She has no idea what I'm gonna do. But I gotta get this out of here, right? So I reached over and I grabbed her hand. And the one thing I remember doing very specifically was I gave her hand a couple squeezes, and I made direct eye contact with her. Just, okay. And, you look back in life and you realize sometimes there is no filter, there's no brain, mouth, you have no idea the connection. The only thing I thought to say as I looked into her eyes, let's go, baby. So I have her in hand, I have my tartan, and we're heading. There's more. No, I'm not done. If I'm gonna go big, I'm going big, right? So I've got her in tow, I'm wearing my tartan, I've got a plan, and we're making our way out. We gotta hang a left at the hostess bar, and then we'll be in a direct line with the exit, right? And just as I made the left and I'm in line of sight, this was very metaphorical because just as we got in sight, a young couple, they were probably in their 30s, they came walking in, and so the doors opened up. And I mean, it really was that light at the end of the tunnel. It truly was. I mean, it was just fate that this building happened to be situated facing west to get the evening sun so it could direct us out while I'm wearing my tablecloth. So I do want to take a moment because these people, this couple that was coming in, they were really fun because I noticed something. This was actually one of the several learning experiences I had that night was how differently men and women observe and react to social situations, right? So, like I said, it was a young couple. They were probably in their 30s. So I'm walking towards them. She is tucked up behind me. It's like we were one. She is doing everything she can to be invisible. I'm wearing a tablecloth. The guy is there. The woman is on his right. And there's some kind of there's an etiquette in terms of eye contact with men. If you know the guy, you nod down. If you don't know the guy, you tilt up. And we made eye contact. I didn't know him, and we didn't say it, but it was just, sup. And that was the extent of it. That was all it was. It was just, and he was done. It was just eye contact, sup, and good. The woman, on the other hand, she was much sharper. Nothing escaped her eye. Nothing was lost on her. The best way I can describe how she was, imagine a tank with a turret on top. And so, you're gonna lose me here, but as she's walking, eye contact, her gaze never wavered from me. It was like a predator. I mean, it was just a little unnerving, but she sized me up. What on earth is this scrawny high school kid doing wearing a tablecloth, dragging a poor girl out? I don't want to know. They just kept walking by. No one said a word. We managed to get through the door. I'm bathed in the light of freedom. But then, I'm still not done. The Boy Scout in me came in, and I realized I paid for the meal. I didn't pay for a tablecloth. And so the Boy Scout here is sitting there fighting, distorting. And I finally got it off, and I throw the tablecloth on the ground and left it there. I decided they got their money's worth in entertainment from me. And we're free. So we were totally free to walk to my Honda Civic hatchback, get in, drive her home in absolute silence. We did not say a single word. We were both juniors in high school. We did not speak to each other ever again. And even with no form of communication between the two of us, I am quite certain that we had this implicit agreement that this was all categorized under the category of that which we will not speak of. So that was my crazy date.
So surely there's some woman out there telling the other side of this story. And if you know her or you've heard that story, we would love to get in touch. All right. I would like to invite out the real workforce behind Dark Winter Nights for a thank you. This is our executive producers, Ryan, the newest West Valley Hall monitor, Peterson. Robin makes the best vegetable dip. Are they coming? Chris is a poster cheater, Zwolinsky. And Rob hasn't experienced a single day of 40 below this winter, Prince. And now we'd like to invite back all of our amazing storytellers from tonight for a photo and a round of applause. Help me inviting Randi Carnahan, Art and Cyndie Warbelow, Dave Dershin, Steve Hovenden, Pat Levy, and Bruce Miller. All right. You guys, you're an amazing audience. Never forget, these are the stories we tell on Dark Winter Nights in Alaska. Thank you so much.